So we reduced the 4-1 in comparison to the 3-1, and you can see the overall length of the tooth here, or width of the tooth I should say, is less than that of the 3-1. I've tagged the tooth back onto the wax, let the wax cool down, and now I'm going to remove 3-1. Just going to soften the wax a little bit so I don't displace the teeth adjacent to it. I'm going to remove 3-1 and trim off the mesial and distal aspects of that tooth, still maintaining the overall shape, and try to match the overall size of the 4-1. So take this one out. Clean off the wax into approximately. Set that aside. And once again, clean off the wax off the tooth. And with our handpiece and our tapered burr, you can use any burr of preference, really, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm going to reduce the distal and the mesial proximal surface of the tooth in a rounded fashion here, and also on the mesial. And still try to recreate the overall shape of the tooth, whether it's tapered or square tapered or ovoid, whatever it might be. So I'm rounding off the tooth this way, all the way around. It's not a straight cut, but it's a rounded from the lingual to the facial and back. If you're not sure, just tentatively put it back and make sure you're at the right width, because if you over trim it, then you have to go back and trim the other one, and if you over trim that, then you're looking to buy a new set of teeth. So if I match the midlines again, I anticipate to see some space now between the 3-2 and the 3-1 and the 3-2. That looks pretty good. Seal that down. I'm not too worried too much about the position right now. I can go back and tweak it, but I want to make sure that I'm able to fit all the interiors on there. So remove the 3-2, clean it off, and once again reduce it, maintain the same shape, and make sure that the lateral looks like a lateral in respect to the central, so it has to be a little bit wider. If I were to gauge how much I'm taking off this tooth right now, probably about 0.2 of a millimeter on either side. You can adjust your RPMs if you're getting really close to where the surface that you're trying to achieve, so you don't over trim the tooth. Heat up the wax a little more down here in the cervical portion. And place it in and see how close we get. Wax is still a little bit cold. Need to heat that up a little bit more. And reintroduce our tooth here and see how it relates to the centrals. And now have an idea how much space that we have between the lateral and the first bicuspid, which looks considerably bigger. I'm going to tentatively seal this tooth down. Just have a quick look here how it looks up against the opposing. That looks pretty good. Seal it on the lingual side. And then I'm going to bring the canine, see if I have any chance of fitting it in here. I don't think I do, but just for the sake of the demo. Let's see if it fits in here. All right. It's better, but it's not there yet. And see how that relates to the opposing. There's not much overjet now between that 3-3 and the opposing arch. We have overjet in the centrals and the lateral, but not so much on the canine. So that canine needs to be positioned further lingually than what it is right now. So the call we have to make here is, do we reduce the canine, just the canine, or do we reduce the canine and or the mesial of the 4 and or some more on the lateral? Or do I even have to reduce the centrals some more? So there's a lot of things that you have to consider now. I think looking at this case, I'm going to reduce the lateral a little bit more, just a bit more. Obviously the canine and a little bit of the 4. So I'm looking at about 1/10 of a millimeter reduction on the lateral. So I'm going to have to pull this out first. You could just simply reduce the canine and try it back in, but I don't think it will fit. So just to save myself some back and forth, reduce a little bit more with the lateral. A little bit on the mesial as well. Make sure you reduce it in a rounded fashion, like so it's not flat looking. And you go evenly along the length of the tooth to maintain the same shape of the tooth. Okay, that looks, I think that should be okay. We'll place it back into position. I have a huge interproximal space here. So what I'm going to do, just to close up the contact a little bit more, I'm going to reduce a little more on the mesial incisal third on the lateral, and hopefully it won't look like a central. So the overall shape of the tooth is maintained. And now the interproximal space is closed up a little bit more. It looks like I'm creating a little more space between the lateral and the first bicuspid for the canine. And let's see if this canine has any chance of fitting in here. I don't think it will, but it's getting awfully closer. So I'm going to reduce the canine next in the same fashion that I did with the central and the laterals. Just make sure we clean off the tooth from all the wax. And once again, reduce a little bit on either side of the tooth on the mesial and distal proximal surfaces in a rounded fashion. Especially inside the lingual aspect, on the lingual third, because as the arch gets a little more narrow, it's the lingual third that's going to interfere with the next tooth, with the adjacent tooth. Okay, we're getting closer and closer, I think. Let me just soften up the wax some more to get a better idea if this fits in there. Be sure not to have any wax interproximately. Let's see if that fits in there now. Almost. Almost. And I think if I reduce a little bit on the 3-4 mesial, I'm going to get that tooth to go in there just enough. Let's see how it looks, though, before we do that, how it looks against the opposing in terms of the overjet. Almost there. So just a little more movement to the lingual will create the proper overjet. And I'm not going to reduce the canine anymore because it looks relative to the lateral as well as the central. So we haven't changed anything. The overall look is the same. So I'm going to remove the canine and I'm going to reduce a little bit on the mesial surface of the 4. So I'm going to take my handpiece and hold it in a way to reduce a little mesial on the 4. Try not to reduce anything on the lateral. I would say that was no more than about 1/10 of a millimeter, so about 100 microns worth of reduction. Let's see how that fits in there now. Almost better, almost, and I think I can reduce that just a little bit more. Make sure you round it off, don't leave it flat. And I'm going to reduce a little bit here on the lateral. and possibly a very, very small reduction on the canine as well, on either side. A little more towards the lingual. And let's try that back in. Just going to soften up the wax. It looks like I have enough space, but let's just see. We'll know in about 10 seconds. Make sure that the long axis of the teeth are positioned correctly. Otherwise, if you over tilt the tooth, you'll make it a lot wider than it needs to be. And then it'll appear that it's not going to fit, but it looks like I'm on the right track here. Let's see how that compares to the opposing. I think I can use a little more over jet. So overall, I have the overbite that I need. I got the tooth to squeeze in there. But if we look at the amount of over jet that we have, is very minimal. Very minimal. We need to have a little more over jet so we don't have the patients closing down in centric occlusion with their incisors in contact. We want them to have contact back here to promote that retruding the mandible into centric relation. But nevertheless, let me just check it protrusively and some lateral movement. So if I move my articulator protrusively now, the incisors are in contact, or at least the 4-1 is. Posteriors, they're still okay. Lateral excursion to the right. That's pretty good too. So you can see how the upper canine interdigitates into approximately between the lower 3-4 and 3-3. So that looks pretty good. So the 3-3 is at the right height. Possibly there's too much spacing between the 2-2 and the 3-2, so I can tweak that a little bit. Either raise the lower lateral or lower the upper lateral a little bit, so we have simultaneous contact there. It's looking good. What I don't like about this now is the amount of overjet that we have here. It's rather minimal. So off camera, what I'm going to do is go back and reduce every tooth respectively so I can make them a little more narrow, so I can position them in a much more lingual position, which requires less space.